In October 2023, my hiking pals Ben, Alexis, and new friend Alan set off for another 38-mile adventure through the Paria Canyon. Stepping into the river channel about 50 miles south of where it emerges near Bryce Canyon, we began where most hikers do, just south of US 89 near Big Water, Utah, at what's called the White House Trailhead. Starting late in the afternoon, we had 3.5 miles to hike before reaching our camp and formally entering the wilderness area. With our heads down, negotiating slick sand and river rock, we left the rest of the world behind. Ben is our unofficial guide. Having obtained the necessary permits, he secured our transportation and is patiently answering questions about the area. He's been through the bowels of Paria scores of times, and also reluctantly serves as the physician of our expedition. This is Alexis's 4th trip through Paria, and last year traveled its entirety, almost 100 miles, in a daring solo adventure. A mystic fellow, he seems happy to be back and away from his work in emerging technology. Alan, who explains has made several rim-to-rim trips through the Grand Canyon, brought experience and enthusiasm for backcountry travel. An avid hunter with an advanced scientific background, he strikes a balance between passion for nature and the biological sciences that may shape its future. I've lost count, but since this might be my 20th trip in Paria, and it feels like a homecoming. I've arrived ready to surrender to the sand and sky, lose a few toenails, and forget about it all for a few days. After settling into our first camp, we gather for mealtime. We've routinely assembled under the canopy of a trusty cottonwood that marks this camp, but were discouraged by the entrails of a raven that lay exposed heavenward in what had always been the center of our kitchen. We retreated to a comfortable area nearby, discussed the menu, and got to work preparing our dinner. "Well, what do you guys think?" I asked. "Beautiful," said Alan. "Happy to be here," said Alexis. "What do you think it all means?" I asked. Shoulders shrugged, but no one answered. Afterwards, I walked the stream bank, admiring the sound of the water, sat beside it, and waited for the stars. The next morning, we headed downriver to the Narrows section of the Paria. The Narrows is a bewildering 7-mile segment of the canyon where water can cover the floor from wall to wall inches deep in favorable times, be completely dry many months of the year, or present a 50-foot-high wall of water in deadlier ones. Just this year, several people lost their lives in the canyon, and many more had to be rescued. It's said that marks from human fingernails can be found scratched into the stone surfaces where the less fortunate have tried to claw to safety. Within the Narrows, many stone slabs, like giant bookends, rest against the walls and enable hikers to squeeze through the tunnels they create. In at least one place, Slide Rock, a broken portion of rock the size of a small apartment building leans against the canyon wall as its bottom is eroded away like a pencil point. The picturesque sculpture creates a passage big enough for a school bus to pass under. About 7 miles into our hike, we arrived at the confluence of Paria's largest tributary, Buckskin Gulch, and where the Paria River flows out of Utah and into Arizona. Last year, the Buckskin Gulch was so thick with quicksand that attempts to explore it were met with dense, wet, sandy opposition. This year's floods appear to have swept the confluence clear of the debris, sand, and mud, enough to allow Alexis and Alan a brief trip into the Slot Canyon. Ben and I rested on our backs near the confluence, staring up at the narrow strip of blue sky, listening to the birds. When Alan and Alexis returned, we ate lunch and prepared to push to the first of many springs along the way. After another couple of hours, we arrived at Big Spring, filled our water bags and bottles, and rested. It would be another hour or 2 miles of hoisting the heavy water to our camp for the night, the comfort of our chairs, and the laughter of our social hour. The camp at mile 15 has a grassy and mossy ground cover that is distinctive from the other camps within the canyon. It implies a more humid environment and seemed to be warmer in spite of the shade the large 600-foot red wall casts in the area hours before sundown. On our third day, we would break for a short examination of the Adams pump in Judd Hollow. The rusty old pump is almost 100 years old and represents the determination and spoils of pioneers who attempted and failed to bring the Paria up and over the high canyon walls to water their livestock. A little further down the river from the pump, we would arrive at Rather Canyon and the trail up to the namesake stone arch. Having made the trip to the arch several times, Ben and I agreed to wait for Alexis and Alan to make the journey to the 200-foot span. While they were gone, Ben and I sunned ourselves on the sandy terrace across from the mouth of Rather Canyon and drank cans of warm beer. 9 years ago, on a late spring afternoon, my brother made the journey up to Rather Arch trying to have a vision. He returned in the twilight with an empty canteen, a weary expression, and was covered head to foot with prickly pear quills. To this day, I'm not certain he found what he was looking for, but do know it was an experience he'll never forget. When Alan and Alexis returned, I asked the two of them what they thought. "Pretty cool," remarked Alan. "Longer hike than I remember," according to Alexis. Burping loudly, I crushed my empty beer can and wondered to myself if the arch had revealed anything to them, taught them something, or offered guidance. We started off for our long-awaited reunion and inspection of Shower Spring. For almost a year, Alexis had insisted that Shower Spring was decimated in a flash flood. He traveled the canyon last November, about a month after Ben and I, and found only ruins where a beautiful spring had once been. Ben and I pressed him several months ago about the details, confirmed that his account was indeed located within the vicinity of the beloved oasis, and scoured the online message boards for months, trying to learn about the disaster and what we might expect when we arrived. Would the stone and sand yield to the time and pressure of the water? Would we be forced to search for an alternative supply? How would we eulogize our old friend when we saw it for ourselves? As we observed the stone memories that tower above the springs come closer into view, we became more anxious to learn its fate. At the base of the cliffs, near the river's edge, the stand of willows and sedges lined the shoreline as it had always before. Ben had already scrambled up the bank when I arrived. Quickly removing my pack, I entered the familiar thicket, smiling. Within seconds, my feet submerged into the dark pool that accumulates with the spring water, saw my friend, and together celebrated Shower Spring and its perseverance. We heaped sarcasm on Alexis for putting us through a year of unnecessary grief, and the episode would persist as a theme for the rest of our adventure. I brought a pocket radio so we could listen to the playoff baseball games on the last 2 nights of our trip. Through a hazy signal, we could hear the home team win Game 4 while we sat in the darkness beside the river, the walls, and less reliable spring. In the morning, we all struggled to fill our water bags and bottles from the trickling flow of last reliable spring. I suggest the name be changed to Reliably Slow Spring, but we were all grateful that it was there. I decided a few years ago that Mile 25, or Last Reliable Spring, is my favorite camp in the canyon. Soaring walls, soft sandy beaches, a few Fremont poplars, and a dependable spring make it all very scenic and inviting. On our last full day, it was sunny and warm, and hikers have very little shade or respite from the exposure. However, the last 13 miles or so of the wilderness has discernible trails, making travel faster and easier than the boulder-choked river. On our last evening, 10 miles downriver, within the uranium-bearing Chinle Formation, the crackle of the surrounding radiation during the broadcast made the effort to tune into the game a challenging one, and we gave up. In the silence that followed, I think we all yearned for meeting in the surroundings and the days that we'd shared. The next morning, with only a couple miles to our car, everyone seemed eager to return to our families, or cats if you asked Alexis. Running water, ice cubes, and other conveniences we take for granted. I think I can speak for all of us when I say we left humbled by the simplicity of the canyon. The first few steps onto the roadbed near Lee's Ferry marked the end of our adventure. After tossing my shoes into the dumpster and scrubbing my feet at the boot wash, we began the journey home. Absent easy answers to our questions, I started to consider that rivers and canyons don't convey meaning. In fact, I believe we may have had the question wrong all along. Wilderness doesn't reveal meaning or answers, but rather spending time in wilderness is meaningful, and a meaningful wilderness experience is what we were all looking for.